How much control will the US have over Venezuela's oil? Caracas says that it's opening up the sector to private players. That follows Washington's dramatic intervention in the country in early January. But who will stand to gain from the changes, Venezuela or the United States, or both? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. It all began with a direct US attack on Venezuela earlier this month. Back then, President Donald Trump made it clear that he was only interested in the country's substantial oil reserves. On Thursday, the government in Caracas announced a massive overhaul of the petroleum sector. The interim president has signed a law easing state control and opening the door for private firms to invest in the country. For many, it paves the way for American oil giants to return to Venezuela with massive investments and consequentially massive profits. We'll discuss with our guests the significance of the move in just a moment. But first, Imogen Kimber reports.
Radical changes are taking place in Venezuela's oil industry. Parliament has passed a law that will open up the sector to private companies after more than 40 years of state ownership. Although interim President Delcy Rodriguez says it's in keeping with her predecessor's policies.
In this law is President Nicolas Maduro's vision for the future, because there are those who think we pulled this law out of nowhere. No, we had already studied this law. It's reformed together with President Maduro.
Feelings in Venezuela are mixed. Some are in favour and say the oil sector desperately needed reform. The infrastructure is in bad shape, which makes production difficult.
Through the new oil reform, we will achieve new revenues, which will be effectively invested in the health sector, the education sector, and for the benefit of the people in general.
But not everyone is convinced.
The oil reform law is going to benefit one group, those who govern. For us, never.
Maduro and his wife were captured on January the 3rd from their home by US forces. Rodriguez says she later discussed the path forward for her country and its petroleum sector with US President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Shortly after the reforms were passed, Washington eased sanctions on Venezuelan crude exports. Sanctions were a major contributor to Venezuela's economic crisis. Days after Maduro's capture, Trump had a round table with the chiefs of some of the US's biggest oil firms. They told him the industry in Venezuela is currently uninvestable. So Trump has proposed a $100 billion reconstruction plan. Venezuela has around 17 to 20% of the world's oil, but only produces around 1% of the oil used. Although much of the oil is heavy crude, which is costly and difficult to extract and process. Rodriguez also said Venezuela is exporting its first ever shipment of natural gas. The Venezuelan parliament and the US promise the people these changes are for the better. But the real test will be when Venezuelans start seeing the material benefits. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. From Caracas, we're joined by Elias Ferrer, founder and director of Orinoco Research. He analyses Venezuela's economy and politics. From Houston, Andrew Lipow is president of Lipow Oil Associates. And also in Caracas is Phil Gunson, senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Elias, let's start with you. As we saw in Imogen's report, these oil reforms are being presented as a purely Venezuelan decision. Yet it follows those calls, as we heard, with Washington, with President Trump and Marco Rubio, and benefits US companies and reverses years of policy under Nicolas Maduro. So, what is it? Sovereignty or submission?
So we can definitely say that this is something that the US government is requesting Delcy Rodriguez to do, and that oil corporations told the Trump administration, essentially, if you want us to invest in Venezuela, we need this set of reforms. Now, there was a willingness by certain sectors of the Venezuelan government to carry out some of these reforms. And actually, we had two drafts. We had an initial one that it sounded, it wasn't too far-fetched, and it was kind of reinforcing some of the reforms that had been carried out in the last 3-4 years. But now what we saw on Thursday was a complete overhaul of the Venezuelan oil industry that even reverses some of the measures that were made in the 70s, right? Like well before Hugo Chavez came to power. So there's definitely, I mean, you cannot say that this is something that the Trump administration and big oil wanted and told the Venezuelan government to do. Andrew,
what do you make of it? Allowing companies to produce and market their own oil is, as Elias was saying, a radical shift. Is this a genuine attempt to revive Venezuela's oil industry, or surrender of state control under pressure?
Well, I think this is the first step of many to open up the Venezuelan oil industry. We saw that Venezuelan oil production had peaked in 1997 at 3.5 million barrels a day, and today it's under 1 million barrels a day. If you want investment in Venezuela, these private and publicly traded oil companies really need more certainty as far as the legal, financial, and commercial frameworks. And what was done on Thursday is the first step in order to proceed.
Phil, what's your view on this? And Dulcie says that it's in keeping with Maduro's vision for the future, and it wasn't pulled out of nowhere. For years, state control of oil was treated as sacrosanct in Venezuela. I mean, why now, and why so decisively?
Yeah, well, it's true to say that to an extent, these demands by the US are pushing at an open door, a semi-open door, in the sense that lots of people within the government and within the Chavista movement more broadly understood that the extremely restrictive, let's say punitive measures that were taken, for example, in 2007 by Hugo Chavez, which were, at the height of the oil boom when the oil price was really high. Typically, resource nationalism kicked in, and the foreign companies were subjected to much more restrictive terms. And now, of course, the situation worldwide is very different. The oil price is much, much lower than it was then. So to a degree, this is something that it had to be done. People within the government and the movement recognize that. But there's been a lot of resistance to it. And part of that resistance, of course, does come from nationalist elements, hardliners within the regime who are still there, who are still pushing back against this. But I think we also have to put it in context, because this is the first of what Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, says will be a 3-stage process under the tutelage of the United States, whereby the stage we're in now is economic stabilization, which is perhaps the easiest part. Then we're supposed to move on to recovery, which is where the big investment comes in, literally tens of billions of dollars required just for the oil industry alone, let alone the rest of the infrastructure. And then political transition, which is the trickiest bit.
Elias, if major national assets are being restructured under an interim authority and quickly, where does democratic accountability sit in all of this? What do the Venezuelan people feel about this?
Well, I think starting with how the Venezuelan people feel, I think there's a lot of hope more than anything, because the situation economically, politically, and in many ways was so drastic, so dire that most people are just saying, okay, whatever comes now, it cannot be worse, and it's probably going to be better. And especially when we see things like, oh, there might be new investment coming in, the political prisoners that are being freed. Overall, what we're seeing in Venezuela is that most people are going along with this change, and maybe even pressing for this change to go faster, to go further. But I mean, yeah, there is a question about sovereignty and how people feel, and how what kind of a say are people going to have? Because initially, I mean, there was already a problem with the Venezuelan government not giving people a say, and now the second problem is the U.S. Taking over, essentially, right? So we're going from two kind of very authoritarian processes of making decisions, and in none of those cases, it's about how the people feel necessarily, right?
Andrew, I read somewhere today that at current oil prices, heavy Venezuelan crude struggles to compete. Tell us why that is. Tell us something about Venezuela's oil and whether or not it is as valuable as President Trump would like us to believe that it is.
Well, the Venezuelan oil that's produced in the Orinoco Belt is very, very heavy. It's almost as heavy as water, and it requires a significant amount of upgrading before it even reaches the refineries in the United States or Europe. And as a result, due to its heaviness and its content of a lot of sulfur, it trades at a discount to whether it's West Texas Intermediate here in the US or Brent in Europe and elsewhere around the world. And it trades at about a $10 a barrel discount, which makes the economics that much more challenging when we've got crude oil between $65 and $70 a barrel and estimated production costs closer to $80 a barrel.
Tell us something about Venezuela's oil infrastructure at the moment. We've heard that it's in a state of disrepair. Chevron says that it's not yet willing to commit billions of dollars. It's going to wait and see. What security, legal, political guarantees is actually going to unlock those billions of dollars in investment that's needed?
Well, regarding the infrastructure, the first thing that needs to be stabilized is the electric power grid, given that production and shipping needs all sorts of electricity in order to make the movement of oil from the fields to the ports and onto the market. In addition, we know that the pipelines and the storage terminals and even the dock facilities are in need of repair, and that keeps a lot of the major oil companies from bringing a tanker into the port to load that crude oil. As far as the other guarantees that people are looking at, and this is why Exxon made the statement that Venezuela is uninvestable, they said it's uninvestable except that if we were to change the legal framework, the commercial framework, the financial framework, and then we finally got to the security situation, then they could look at Venezuela as an investment. But Exxon, meanwhile, has been spending a lot of money in their next door neighbors in Guyana, where we've seen oil production go from basically zero to nearly 1 million barrels a day in the last 5 or 6 years.
Phil, to what extent is the government in Caracas caught between a rock and a hard place here? How much freedom does it really have for maneuver? Was it a strategic choice made under pressure, perhaps, the cost of remaining internationally relevant?
Yeah, no, I think more than internationally relevant, it's the question of whether Delcy Rodriguez can balance these two competing pressures. The pressure from Washington, obviously, to carry out major reforms, both economic and political, in a very short space of time, and the hardliners who fear, ultimately, not so much the economic reforms, not so much even the liberation of political prisoners, but genuine economic opening, a return to free and fair elections, a return to independent institutions. Those people fear that at the end of the day, some of them might end up in jail because, of course, there are well-founded accusations of crimes against humanity, drug trafficking, corruption, all sorts of things. Now, the decision, the announcement that Delcy Rodriguez made yesterday of a general amnesty for all crimes except, I think, murder and certain other particularly heinous crimes, a general amnesty for everybody, which of course includes not only opposition but also government, should lead certainly to the release of most, if not all, the political prisoners. But it also is a message to those hardliners, I think. It's saying, you're also going to be amnestied. Now, whether that helps to smooth things over remains to be seen. The amnesty itself, has yet to be examined in detail. So we'll wait to see. But I think it's the first step that we've seen that suggests that really we might be on the verge of a genuine transition.
Elias, how do people there in Caracas feel about that? Many Venezuelans, we're given to understand, wanted Maduro out, but the same governmental structures remain. It was just Maduro that was spirited away in the middle of the night. Are people actually any better off? Do they feel that they might be better off at some point in the not-too-distant future, or has power simply changed hands at the top?
Well, in terms of people being better off already, it's been less than a month, so it's too early to say, although there has been a change with the US allowing for oil exports, and that's definitely been felt with the exchange rate and inflation. That there's definitely been a thing that the people are talking about in the street. That situation has been eased a lot considerably. Of course, many people are realizing that it's only Maduro that's gone, but because changes are happening anyway, I think most people are very hopeful and looking forward to the changes that are coming. But there is an element that I think that we need to consider. I mean, Phil was rightly saying that Delcy Rodriguez and her government are between the U.S. demands and the hardliners, but there's also an element that we haven't, that's kind of been dormant up until now, which is kind of like the masses, like how they've been waiting for something to happen, but now they start to have expectations that things are going to change, that political prisoners, all of them are going to be free, that there's going to be more money in the street, and those kind of things. If those expectations aren't being met, I think we might see that pressure from below increase, and it could overtake the government at some point if it isn't managed properly.
Andrew, as we heard in Imogen's report, the state will no longer be guaranteed majority control over the country's oil profits. We also heard that corporate disputes, will now be settled in foreign courts, removing Venezuelan jurisdiction. What are we to make of that? Is that about giving foreign investors confidence, perhaps?
Well, I think it is. Many of the oil companies, they're willing to take the risk and produce oil down in Venezuela, but they wanted the right to market their share. So that was a big deal that has been changed. In addition, in 2007, Venezuela required that the state-owned oil company own 60% of the joint ventures. Now they've changed that so that the maximum royalty will be 30%. So that puts more money on the table for these private investments. And finally, many companies felt that if the disputes and arbitration were taking place in Venezuela, they really had no ability to win over the disputes. And by moving those into foreign courts, they have a better chance to have what they would deem as a fair resolution of any dispute that arises.
Phil, as we heard, the interim president spoke directly with Donald Trump and Marco Rubio. Is it credible that the reforms announced on Thursday emerged without any expectations being set in those phone calls? Was the interim president complicit in Maduro's removal or merely swept along by outside forces? And does that distinction actually matter to Venezuelans?
I'm not sure if it matters too much to Venezuelans, although it does obviously affect the way that the figure of Delcy Rodriguez herself and her brother Jorge, who's the head of the National Assembly, the parliament here, the way they're perceived and their role in all of this. I mean, are they genuinely partners, in a sense, with the US in producing this reform? Have they anticipated that this is necessary and that there's no way that, it's better for them to, if you like, ride the tiger rather than to jump off and possibly get eaten? But I think, as far as Delcy, whether she was complicit in, I don't think she was complicit in the sense of, betraying Maduro exactly. But I think certainly it seems that there were messages sent or understandings reached at an earlier stage before Maduro was taken that led the US to believe that if Maduro was out, then they could deal with the people left behind. And that is crucial. I mean, it's one thing, of course, to be simply obeying orders under duress against your own will. It's another if, this is part of a plan in which, to some extent, Delcy and her brother Jorge and the other kind of, I hesitate to call them moderates. They're not really moderates, but if you like, the reformers, perhaps is a more neutral term, whether they're actually not just going along with this because they have no choice, but whether they see for themselves, a way forward. I think the crucial distinction between them and what we tend to call the hardliners is that the hardliners feel that reform, and particularly political reform, is going to be extremely bad news for them personally.
Elias, I want to come back again to the public mood. Venezuelans facing inflation, shortages, hardship. and whether anything has materially improved for them since Maduro's exit. You say it's only been a month. It's probably too soon. But is there a feeling perhaps that things may be different this time? Or do people suspect that this may be yet another elite bargain that's been struck above their heads?
I mean, there's definitely a feeling that things are going to be different. You can see that, well, first we had this issue with inflation cooling down, but that was just because oil shipments are now allowed to leave and be sold out there in the international market. But you can see it inside of Venezuela with things like house prices going up because people think there's going to be new investments. There's going to be Venezuelans that left the country that are going to be coming back. So that's one of the ways that you can feel. And there are many people trying to look at different opportunities where they can invest, or they're trying to see where investors are going to come in. So you really see that people are seeing that things are definitely going to change, at the very least economically, and to some extent politically, and they're trying to be part of that change. And in most of the conversations that you'll end up having in cafes and bars and so on, there is a big feeling of hope.
Andrew, oil reforms take years to pay off, as we've discussed. The infrastructure needs a complete overhaul. Who's expected to endure the weight here for the payoff, and who's prepared to do so, and who benefits immediately? Does anyone?
Well, I think probably Chevron will benefit in the near term since they already have boots on the ground and they're producing about 250,000 barrels a day. But the payoff for the other oil companies is really 5 or 10 years into the future because they've got to spend at least $10 billion a year over the next 10 years just rehabilitating the infrastructure. As far as the person on the street, I think that for them to actually see the benefit of this, I would say the first place would be in electric power generation and the rehabilitation of the grid, because once you get rid of these interruptions on the power supply, that translates into a 24/7 impact for the person in his house or in his business. So that's the first place I look for investment to occur that benefits just, as well as the oil producers, the person on the street.
Elias, is there a credible plan to diversify Venezuela's economy? Could what's happened lead to integration into the global economy system, and will that empower Venezuelans? Is the future bright for Venezuelans now? Do you think this is a key moment?
So, yeah, the future is bright. This is a key moment, but there is also a trap of going into the same problems that led to social conflict that led into the situation that we have now, right? Because, there aren't really plans to diversify the economy. And, what Trump is saying is we want the oil, maybe we might move into the gold, but that's not really changing anything fundamentally. And then, if there is a lot of oil wealth being produced and extracted out of the country, but it's not distributed more evenly, we might again have a situation that led into what we had with Chavismo. And just something I wanted to add something about oil production. It is true that massive investments are needed, but we have seen with certain new contracts that were being used in a very discretionary and opaque way. We already saw very fast production increases. So, for example, in some places some fields were able to go from 25,000 to 75,000 barrels per day in just 2 years. Chevron was able to in 2 years to increase its output by 50%, still in a very restricted environment. And actually, we could say that there are about an additional million barrels per day of what could be called low-hanging fruit, which is fixing existing infrastructure, right? So that can actually happen pretty quickly in 2-3 years if the investment is allowed. And we already seen some sanctions waivers and some laws changing, right? So I don't see that it's going to be that difficult as maybe some people are painting it.
Okay, Phil, I'll come back to you in just a second. Just a final word from Andrew then. Do you agree with what Elias was saying there?
Well, I do agree that there's a bunch of low-hanging fruit out there, but really to make a big step change up, it's going to take many, many years to do that, especially the rehabilitation of many of the upgraders that are along the Venezuelan coast that allow even more production to reach the market.
And Phil, has the US ultimately done Venezuelans a favor? If 5 years from now Venezuela produces more oil, but inequality, repression, hardships remain, will this moment be remembered, the spiriting away of President Maduro in the middle of the night, as a key moment or another missed chance?
Well, the jury is still out. Of course, it's very difficult to know exactly what's going to happen. There are plenty of things that could derail this whole process along the way. And one of them is if the US administration or a subsequent US administration, because of course there's 3 years to run on Trump, but this is a process that's going to take much longer. If the US loses focus, if the process internally runs out of steam, there's a lot of foot dragging by the hardliners that we've mentioned already, then it's quite possible to see this process ultimately running out of steam. We could certainly see economic stabilization. We're already seeing it, as Elias mentioned. We'll see probably a modicum of recovery. Venezuela is now reconnecting to the world. I don't think that reconnecting to the world necessarily will bring democracy or that economic liberalization will bring democracy, but it's reassuring and refreshing to see potential return of airline connections, even to the US itself. So many things that feel like they're on the verge of happening. But as I say, this could run into the sand because it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of concentration and constancy, in order to see this through, both here in Venezuela and abroad. And just one final thing, as has already been mentioned, it's crucial that the mass of the Venezuelan population, ordinary Venezuelans, the bulk of the people who voted in 2024 for a change of government and didn't get it, those people their voice has to be heard. They have to have a seat at the table.
All right. There, gentlemen, I'm afraid we must end it. We're out of time. Elias Ferrer, Andrew Lipow, and Phil Gunson, many thanks indeed. And thanks to you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website, that's at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page, that's at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can always join the conversation on X, our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. Bye for now.